For months, my husband had been entering my mother's bedroom every night. And I had absolutely no idea why. So I did something I never imagined I'd do in 28 years of marriage. I installed a hidden camera. What I found on that tiny recording device didn't just shatter my heart. It obliterated everything I believed I knew about the man who shared my bed. It turned nearly 3 decades of marriage into nothing more than dust and deception. I remember standing in our kitchen that Tuesday morning. It was precisely 4 minutes before 8 o'clock in late February. The aroma of David's coffee still hung in the air, but the house had fallen silent. Through the window, I watched his sedan disappear down our tree-lined avenue. Only then, only when I was absolutely certain he'd gone, did I allow myself to breathe normally. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I gripped the counter so tightly my knuckles turned bone white. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was attempting to break free, preparing me for a confrontation I wasn't convinced I had the courage to face. With legs that felt like they weighed 200 pounds, I climbed the staircase. I walked past the bedroom David and I shared and paused outside what had once been our son's room, the door that now belonged to my mother. I turned the handle slowly, so incredibly slowly, stepped inside and moved straight to the bookshelf. Hidden behind an old photograph, a picture of the 3 of us, me, David, and our son Thomas when he was just a small boy with that radiant smile, was the miniature camera. My fingers shook as I retrieved the tiny memory card. This small piece of plastic contained either confirmation of my paranoia or proof of something so horrific I could barely allow myself to think about it. But for you to truly comprehend how things reached this terrible moment, how I ended up surveilling my own husband in my own house, let me begin from the start. My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm 59 years old and I live in Marietta, just outside Atlanta, Georgia. I spent most of my professional life as an English teacher before retiring. Until several months ago, my greatest worry was whether the azaleas in my garden were receiving adequate sunlight. I was married to David for 28 years. We constructed this entire existence together. In this house, we raised 2 wonderful children. But our foundation, that solid ground I believed we stood upon, it began fracturing 8 years ago. That's when we lost our son Thomas. Lymphoma claimed him. He was only 30 years old. Losing a child, it's not an injury that ever mends. It's like losing part of your soul. You feel the emptiness of it constantly, that void every single moment of your existence. It transformed us both. David buried himself in his career, in his tennis club, in anything that kept him busy and distracted. And I clung to memories with desperate hands and held tight to our daughter Rachel, who was already living in Portland, Oregon with her own family. David and I carried on. We performed the rituals, but the house grew quieter and quieter. Joy became scarce. We existed under the same roof, but it felt like an invisible chasm had opened between us, even in our bed. It was in the midst of all that grief about 4 years ago that my mother Barbara started showing signs. She was 81 at the time, one of the most resilient women I've ever known. She raised me entirely alone, tough as steel, but her mind began deceiving her. Small things initially, forgetting where she'd placed her keys, repeating the same anecdote 4 or 5 times in one evening. Early-stage dementia, her physician explained. For a while, she managed independently in her condominium with daily phone calls and assistance from neighbors. But eventually, it simply wasn't safe anymore. One afternoon, she left the gas stove burning and nearly started a fire. That was my wake-up call. I contacted Rachel, but she'd just had her 3rd baby and was living in a cramped 2-bedroom townhouse. It simply wasn't possible, so there was only one option left. That evening, I made some peppermint tea and sat David down in the kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd chosen our children's names all those years before, where we'd held each other and wept over Thomas's death. "David," I began, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "I need to talk about Mom with you. It's becoming too dangerous for her to live independently. I think she needs to move in with us." He stopped scrolling on his phone and looked at me over his reading glasses. The silence stretched between us. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second feeling impossibly heavy. Finally, he released this long, weary sigh. "Look, Sarah," he said, "I care about your mother. You know I do. But an elderly person with her condition, that transforms everything about a household. It changes our entire existence." "I know," I replied, feeling tears beginning to well up. "But she's my mother. I can't just abandon her to some institution. Not yet, anyway. She's still so present most of the time." He removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. "I understand. I do. But what about us? What about our privacy, our tranquility, Our routine. I'll handle everything, I promised him, hearing the desperation creeping into my own voice. It won't be your burden. I retired for precisely this reason, to have the time. I just need you to agree to this. He stared at me for what felt like forever. And then he said words that at the time felt like the most generous gift imaginable, but today those words echo in my mind as the beginning of a nightmare. All right, Sarah, he said. She can come live here, but I have one condition. He leaned forward, his expression serious, almost stern. You have to be her primary caregiver. I've got my career, my tennis league, my obligations. I can't be here constantly, on call all the time. The responsibility has to rest with you. In that moment, such an overwhelming wave of relief washed over me that I nearly collapsed crying right there. I know, honey. And thank you. Thank you so much. You have absolutely no idea what this means to me. In mid-September, Mom moved in. We converted Thomas's old room for her. We packed away the boxes of his basketball trophies and textbooks and stored them in the garage, painted the walls this gentle lavender color she adored, and arranged photographs of her grandchildren on the dresser. Those first few weeks were like a beautiful dream. It felt like the house had awakened again. The three of us would share breakfast together. I'd spend my days with Mom doing jigsaw puzzles, watching classic films, listening to her stories for the 1,000th time. David would arrive home from the office, inquire about our day, and we'd all sit down for dinner together. It was a peaceful time, like an Indian summer for our fractured little family. I truly believed we'd made the right choice. I believed we'd discovered a new kind of happiness. But then December arrived, and with the bitter Georgia cold, a different kind of coldness crept into our home too. Mom started seeming diminished somehow, more exhausted than usual, barely touching her favorite dishes. I noticed she grew quieter, especially whenever David was present. I tried to dismiss it. Dementia progresses, I told myself. It's winter. The season makes people melancholy. But deep in my heart, I felt this cold prickling of worry, a feeling I couldn't quite identify, but one that refused to leave me alone. It was like hearing distant thunder on a perfectly clear day. You try to convince yourself it's just your imagination, but deep down, somewhere deep down, you know a storm is gathering. That sense of foreboding, that feeling of a storm building on a cloudless day. It started taking definite shape a couple of weeks after New Year's. The change in my mother, Barbara, was no longer subtle at all. She began to disappear into her own clothing. The food on her plate remained mostly untouched. She would just push green beans from one side to the other with her fork, head down, as if the simple act of eating required monumental effort. But it wasn't the exhaustion or lack of appetite that squeezed my heart the hardest. It was the fear. It was this almost invisible thing, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. When it was just the two of us in the house during the daytime, Mom was herself. Conversational, stubborn, sometimes forgetful, but present. Her eyes would brighten when she'd tell a story for the 1,000th time about her youth in Charleston. But the moment we heard the sound of David's car pulling into the driveway around 6 o'clock in the evening, it was like someone flipped a switch inside her. I'd see it immediately. Her shoulders would hunch just slightly. Her hands, which had been gesturing as she spoke, would fold quietly in her lap. Her voice would drop to barely a whisper. At the dinner table, she'd hardly speak at all, and her eyes would track David's every single movement. It wasn't the look of someone engaged in conversation. It was a watchful look, the way a small bird watches a predator in the yard, aware of every step, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. At first, I created excuses. Thousands of them. I'd tell myself things like, it's just David's stress from the office. He comes home exhausted. Or, he just doesn't know how to interact with dementia. He's uncomfortable around her. I even thought maybe it was difficult for him to see someone else occupying the room that had been Thomas's. I wanted to believe anything other than the ugly truth that was starting to form in my peripheral vision. But truth has this stubborn way of making itself known, whether you want it to or not. One night in late January, David had a business dinner, so it was just going to be me and Mom. I prepared her favorite meal, roasted chicken with sweet potatoes, and without his presence there, she ate. She actually ate with genuine appetite, had seconds even, and told a joke that made me laugh out loud. It was such a good, normal evening that for a moment I allowed myself to relax. I thought, see, Sarah, it's all in your head. Later, we were in the living room watching some random television program. She was curled up in a blanket on the sofa, looking so small and fragile. Out of nowhere, she reached for my hand. Her skin felt thin as tissue paper and cold. Sarah, honey, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Does he want me here? Does he like having me in his house? The question hit me like a blow to the stomach. I squeezed her hand tighter. Of course he does, Mom. Why would you even ask something like that? She looked down at her hands in her lap. I don't know, she said quietly. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the way, like I'm a burden on your lives. Never, I said firmly, my voice stronger than I actually felt inside. Don't you ever think that. You are not a burden. This is your home now. We love you. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her frail bones beneath her sweater. She seemed to settle down after that, but her question planted this cold seed of doubt deep in my chest. A seed that started sprouting in early February on a lazy Sunday afternoon. We were on the sofa again. I was reading a magazine and she was attempting to crochet, though her hands weren't as steady anymore. She was wearing a blue cardigan. At one point, she reached down for a ball of yarn that had rolled onto the floor, and the sleeve of her cardigan rolled up just slightly, exposing her forearm. And that's when I saw it. My blood turned to ice. There on her pale, thin skin was this ugly purplish-yellow stain right in the middle of her forearm. It was large, unmistakable, and in the center of the bruise was a darker mark, almost perfectly round, the exact size and shape of a thumbprint. It wasn't a normal bump or accident. It was the mark of a grip, of force. I set my magazine down. My voice came out as barely a thread. Mom, what is that on your arm? Instantly, she yanked her sleeve down, covering the mark completely. Her eyes went wide, and she looked away, staring hard at the wall. Oh, that? It's nothing, she stammered. I bumped it on the closet door. I was getting a sweater, and I just bumped it. You know how clumsy I can be? But she wouldn't meet my eyes. And the way she spoke, that rush to hide it, the sudden fear in her expression, it screamed that she was lying. I'd seen my mother bump into furniture 1,000 times over the years. Those marks were scrapes, irregular shapes, maybe some swelling. This was entirely different. This was the mark of a hand, of fingers, of deliberate force. I just sat there frozen, my heart hammering in my ears, the magazine completely forgotten in my lap. You bumped it on the door, I repeated in this flat voice, more to myself than to her. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at that wall, suddenly fascinated by the texture of the paint. In that moment, staring at the sleeve of her cardigan hiding that awful mark, I knew. I didn't know the how or the why. I didn't even want to let myself imagine it. But I knew something terrible was happening. And I knew I had to talk to David, and it was not going to be a pleasant conversation. I waited for the rest of Sunday afternoon to pass in this haze of anxiety. Every time I looked at my mother curled up on that sofa, tugging at her cardigan sleeve to ensure her arm stayed covered, a knot formed in my throat. I decided I couldn't have this conversation with David in front of her. It had to be after she went to bed. That night, dinner was almost silent. The tension was so thick I could swear the meatloaf on my plate tasted like sawdust. David talked about tennis, about some account he'd secured at the office, and I just nodded and mumbled, "That's nice, honey," while my brain rehearsed the confrontation to come. Around 9 o'clock, I helped Mom get ready for bed. As I tucked her in and pulled the covers up to her chin, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Lock the door, Sarah," she whispered, her eyes locked intensely on mine. "Why, Mom?" I said, trying to sound casual. "No one's going to come in here. Just, please, lock it." Her request felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. I closed her bedroom door, but I didn't lock it. Instead, I went downstairs where David was watching a basketball game on the television, the sound filling the quiet house. I took a deep breath and walked to the kitchen. I needed something to hold on to, something to steady me. I poured myself a glass of water and waited. A few minutes later, he came in, yawning. "Boring game," he said. "Think I'm heading to bed?" "David, wait," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd intended. "We need to talk." He stopped, leaning casually against the doorframe. "This late, Sarah? Is something the matter?" "Yes," I said. "Something is very much the matter." I set my glass down on the counter with a dull thud. "I saw a mark on my mother's arm today, a bad bruise." He frowned, this look of calculated confusion crossing his face. "A bruise? Where?" "On her forearm," I said. "And it wasn't just any bruise, David. It looked like a grip, like a thumbprint." He laughed, not a real laugh, but this dismissive puff of air that made my stomach churn. "Oh, for God's sake, Sarah." He walked over to get himself a glass. She's elderly. Old people bruise easily. You know that. Their skin is like paper. She probably doesn't even remember how it happened. Those were exactly the words I'd been dreading, that cold logic, that easy dismissal. She said she bumped it on the closet door, I continued, but she was frightened. And the mark doesn't look like a bump from a door, David. That's when his tone shifted. The fake patience vanished instantly, replaced by sharp irritation. And what exactly are you implying here? He asked. That I did it? He looked me right in the eye, challenging me directly. Is that what you're saying, Sarah? After 28 years together, you actually think I would hurt your mother? He had this way of making me feel like I was the irrational one. He was a master at turning things around, at putting me on the defensive. I'm not implying anything, I lied, backing down. I'm just worried about her. And she's been acting scared around you lately. Scared? He scoffed. She has dementia, Sarah. Her moods swing wildly from 1 hour to the next. 1 minute she's laughing, the next she's crying because she can't remember what day it is. You're being overprotective and frankly paranoid. Is this what it's going to be like now? Every little scrape, every little mark is going to turn into some kind of investigation? I warned you this would change our lives. He drank his water in one long gulp and slammed the glass into the sink. I'm going to bed, and I strongly suggest you stop looking for problems where there aren't any. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there alone under that cold, fluorescent light. I felt small, stupid, doubting myself. Was he right? Was my worry and grief over my mother's condition making me see monsters in the shadows? I went to bed that night feeling guilty and confused. But a seed of suspicion, once it's planted, doesn't die easily. In the weeks that followed, everything only got worse. Barbara's fear became so overwhelming that she basically confined herself to her room whenever David was home. I'd bring her meals up on a tray, and she'd only emerge when she was absolutely certain he wasn't around. And the marks, they kept appearing. A small purplish bruise on her wrist that she hid under her sleeve. A reddish blotch on her shoulder that I only glimpsed for a second when she bent over to pick something up. The final straw came on a Thursday afternoon. I was coming down the stairs when I heard quiet voices from the kitchen. It was David and my mother. He'd come home early from the office. I stopped halfway down the staircase, hidden by the wall. I couldn't make out the exact words, but his tone, it was low, sharp, cold. It was the tone of voice you'd use to scold a disobedient animal. I heard my mother murmur something back, a weak, almost inaudible reply. Then I took a step and made the stair creak loudly. Instantly, David's voice changed completely. Oh, there it is, Barbara, he said, his voice suddenly loud and warm, full of this fake cheerfulness that made me sick to my stomach. I was just helping your mom find the honey, he said as he turned to me with a smile that didn't come anywhere close to reaching his eyes. My mother was standing by the counter, hunched over, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked like a child who'd been caught doing something wrong. He walked past me, kissed my forehead, and said, I'm going to go take a shower before dinner. I just stood there watching his back as he climbed the stairs. That artificial smile, that sudden switch in his entire demeanor, it was like watching an actor's mask slip for just 1 second, revealing the cruel face hiding underneath. And it was in that exact moment, standing in my quiet kitchen, that a piece clicked into place, a terrible, horrifying piece. Mom was always worse in the mornings. Always more tired, more frightened, more confused. It was in the mornings that I'd noticed bruises that hadn't been there the night before, not during the day when I was with her constantly. Not at dinner when we were all together, an icy dread started creeping up my spine. The truth was so horrific my mind tried desperately to reject it. Something was happening during the night. When I was asleep. When the only person awake and moving through the house was my husband. That revelation in the kitchen left me completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. The smell of the casserole I'd started cooking in the oven suddenly seemed nauseating. Everything in my home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt wrong, tainted, corrupted. The thought forming in my mind was so monstrous that part of me wanted to run screaming, to claw it out of my head. David, my David, the man I'd built an entire life with, the father of my children, the man who'd sobbed on my shoulder as we buried Thomas. He was hurting my sick, elderly mother. At night, in secret, while I slept just down the hall. I spent the next several days on high alert, living in 2 completely separate worlds at once. In the world on the surface, I was the same old Sarah. I made coffee each morning, tidied up the house, chatted with my mother, asked my husband about his day at the office. But in the world inside my head, I was a detective, a spy. Every single word he spoke got analyzed. Every look got measured and weighed. I watched him when he interacted with my mother, searching for that cold glint in his eye, that tension in his jaw. And the more I looked, the more I found. His impatience when she took too long to answer a simple question. The irritated sigh when she accidentally dropped her spoon. The way he would physically pull away if she got too close to him. I started sleeping terribly. Any sound in the house would jolt me awake instantly. The creak of a floorboard, the flush of the toilet, the hum of the refrigerator. I would lie there completely motionless next to David's sleeping body, holding my breath, straining my ears to hear. I'd wonder, is he getting up now? Is he leaving our room? Several times I seriously considered getting up and standing watch in the hallway, but I knew if he caught me doing that, it would all be over. He would use it against me somehow, claim I was delusional, say I needed psychiatric help. His denial in the kitchen had been so powerful, so convincing, it had genuinely shaken me. I couldn't confront him again without proof. Hard, undeniable, irrefutable proof. The idea of the camera came to me during one sleepless night around 2:30 in the morning. The room was pitch dark. The only light came from the red numbers on the alarm clock. David was snoring softly beside me, completely at peace. The thought just appeared in my mind, fully formed and terrifying. What if I could actually see what was happening? My heart started beating faster and faster. A camera. A hidden camera. The idea felt both brilliant and like a horrific betrayal all at once. To spy on my own husband. To plant a secret surveillance device in my home. In my mother's bedroom. It was the kind of thing you see in crime dramas on television, not in the real life of a retired English teacher from Marietta. And the fear of what I might discover was almost as overwhelming as the fear of doing nothing at all. What if I was wrong about everything? What if I set up the camera and saw nothing but my mother sleeping peacefully all night long? I would have destroyed 28 years of trust over a crazy suspicion. I would have to look at my husband every single day for the rest of my life knowing I'd accused him in my own mind of the cruelest thing imaginable. But then a stronger image took over my thoughts. The image of that bruise on her arm, the perfect shape of a thumbprint, the raw fear in her eyes when she'd whispered, "Lock the door, Sarah." And I knew in that moment that the risk of being wrong was a luxury I could no longer afford. My mother's safety was worth more than my marriage. It was worth more than the fragile peace we were barely maintaining in that house. The next day, I waited impatiently for David to leave for work. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I went to my computer and started searching for small spy cameras. There were hundreds of options available. I needed one with night vision capability, one that recorded on motion detection, and one small enough to hide effectively. I found one disguised as a regular USB charger for $175. The price of truth. I couldn't use our joint credit card because he'd see the charge on the statement. So I went to the bank and withdrew $200 in cash from my personal account. Then I drove 40 minutes to an electronics store on the other side of town where I was confident no one would recognize me. I paid in cash. The young man at the counter, some kid with earbuds in, barely even looked at me. To him, I was just another elderly woman buying some gadget. He had absolutely no idea I was purchasing a weapon. I spent the rest of that day with my stomach tied in knots, the small box feeling impossibly heavy in my purse. That night at dinner, I could barely force myself to swallow. After David went to the bedroom to watch television, I told my mother I needed to straighten some things on her bookshelf. "Let me help you, dear," she said, starting to get up from her chair. "No, Mom, you stay put. I'll be very quick." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Her room was small and cozy. The dark wood bookshelf stood directly across from her bed, filled with old books and framed photographs. I had the perfect spot already picked out in my mind. There was this photo of the three of us, me, David, and Thomas, on a vacation years and years ago. We were all smiling so wide, the ocean behind us, a framed lie. The camera was small and black, and it fit perfectly behind the picture frame. The tiny lens peeked through a gap between the photograph and the frame. I plugged it into a power strip that was hidden behind the books. I turned it on carefully. A small blue light blinked twice and then went dark. It was armed and recording. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had just turned my mother's bedroom into a potential crime scene. I felt dirty, like a traitor to my own marriage. But when I turned around and looked at her sitting on the edge of her bed, looking so fragile and vulnerable, I knew I had absolutely no choice in the matter. I was her only protector in this house. That night, I lay in bed next to David as stiff as a board. I pretended to be asleep, but every single fiber of my being was on high alert. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock in the morning. I was almost giving up, almost convincing myself I was completely insane, when I heard it. It wasn't loud at all. It was that familiar creak, the protest of a floorboard in the hallway right outside our bedroom door. I knew that sound intimately. David was getting up. I held my breath. The air in the room felt frozen. I didn't dare open my eyes even slightly. I heard his bare feet moving softly on the carpet. I heard the almost inaudible click of our bedroom doorknob turning. He was leaving our room. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. And then came the sound that turned my blood to absolute ice. The soft, almost whispering sound of my mother's bedroom door opening somewhere in the darkness of the hallway. I lay there in the pitch blackness, my heart pounding so violently I was certain it could be heard throughout the entire house. I didn't know exactly what was happening in that room right now, but I knew with a soul-crushing certainty that the camera was recording absolutely everything. I don't know if I actually slept that night at all. I think I drifted in and out of this anxious haze where every tiny sound in the house was amplified 1,000 times. The hum of the heating system, the settling of the house's foundation, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the neighborhood. And the most torturous sound of all, the silence. The horrible silence that followed the click of my mother's bedroom door closing. I don't know how long he was in there, 12 minutes, maybe 15. It felt like an absolute eternity. When I finally heard her door open and close again, and those floorboards creaking as he returned to our room, I curled into a tight ball, turning my back to his side of the bed. My whole body was tense and rigid. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he climbed back in. I felt the warmth of his body just inches away from mine, the man I had shared a bed with for 28 years. And I had never, ever felt so cold in my entire life. The next morning was the performance of a lifetime. The alarm went off at 6:30, exactly like always. David stretched, yawned loudly, and leaned over to kiss my cheek. "Morning, honey," he said casually. The touch of his lips on my skin felt like a shard of ice. I forced what I hoped was a convincing smile. "Morning." We got up and did our normal routine. He showered while I went to the kitchen to make coffee. Every single movement was automatic, rehearsed, robotic. I felt like a spectator watching a film of my own life unfold. When he came downstairs dressed for work, I handed him his mug of coffee. My hands were steady only through sheer force of will. "I'm heading out a bit early today," he said, sipping his coffee while scrolling through the news on his phone. "Got an 8:30 conference call downtown." "All right, dear," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "Drive safely." He finished his coffee, placed the mug in the sink, gave me another quick kiss, and headed for the door. "See you tonight." The very moment I heard the garage door close and the sound of his car engine fading away down the street, it was like the string holding me upright was suddenly cut. My legs buckled, and I had to grab onto the counter to keep from falling. I took a deep breath, then another, then a third. "You can do this, Sarah," I told myself. "You have to know the truth." I left a quick note for my mother saying I was running an errand and would be right back. Then I went upstairs with my heart lodged in my throat. I slipped into her room as quietly as possible. She was still sleeping, a heavy, restless kind of sleep. I went straight to the bookshelf, removed the picture frame with trembling hands, and with fingers that were shaking more than ever, I retrieved the small memory card from the camera. I held it in the palm of my hand, a tiny piece of black plastic, Pandora's box. I went down to my home office, closed and locked the door, and slipped the card into my laptop. The file folder opened automatically. There was just one video file, time-stamped 12:26 a.m. I double-clicked it with my heart in my throat, the screen filled with the grainy black and white image of my mother's room. The night vision gave everything this ghostly, otherworldly appearance. I could see the bed clearly, her outline under the covers. The door was visible in the top left corner of the frame. For a moment, nothing happened at all, just the quiet sound of her breathing. Then the doorknob turned, slow and deliberate. The door opened, and David's silhouette filled the entire frame. My stomach twisted violently into a knot. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. He stood there for several seconds, just staring at the bed in the darkness. Then he moved closer to her. He didn't turn on a light. He leaned over her and shook her. Not gently at all. It was a rough, violent jolt. "Barbara, wake up!" His voice on the video was a harsh whisper, full of absolute venom. My mother stirred, clearly startled, and tried to sit up in confusion. "David, what is it?" "Lie down," he snarled at her, and he shoved her back hard against the pillows. Her frail body gave way with no resistance whatsoever. "You think this is some kind of hotel?" he went on, his voice a hiss of rage. "You think you can just come here and destroy my life, destroy my peace? I have no quiet in this house anymore because of you. You understand me?" My mother started to cry, silent, choked sobs that absolutely shattered my soul. I clapped my hand over my own mouth, feeling bile rising in my throat. I was watching a horror film, and the monster was my husband, and the victim was my mother. "You're a burden, Barbara," he spat the words at her like poison, "a useless burden. Sarah doesn't see it because she's blind. But I see it clearly. I see you sucking the life out of us. Sucking away our money, our time, our peace." Then he did something that made all the air leave my lungs completely. He leaned in close and grabbed her forearm, the same exact arm where I'd seen the bruise. He pulled her up slightly in the bed, his face just inches from hers. The camera picked up every single word with terrible crystal clarity. "You are not going to say one word about this to Sarah," he said. "Not one single word. If you do, I will personally make sure you end up in the worst facility I can possibly find. A place where nobody will visit you, where you will rot completely alone. Do you understand me?" My mother, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire body shaking, just nodded her head weakly. "Yes, good," he said. He shoved her back down on the bed hard, her head hitting the headboard with a dull thud that made me flinch. He straightened up, looked down at her for one more second with pure contempt on his face, and walked out of the room as quietly as he'd entered. The video played on for several more minutes, showing nothing but my mother crying alone in the pitch dark. I slammed the laptop shut. The shock hit me like a physical wave. I felt my whole body start to shake uncontrollably, a coldness that came from deep inside. It was worse. It was 1,000 times worse than anything I could have possibly imagined in my worst nightmares. It wasn't impatience or stress. It was cruelty. Pure, calculated, sadistic cruelty. And it had been going on for weeks, maybe even months, right under my nose, right down the hall while I slept peacefully. The tears I had held back for so long finally came, hot and furious. But they weren't tears of sadness at all. They were tears of rage, a rage so deep and so cold it burned like fire. The image of my mother's terrified face, the sound of my husband's venomous voice. It was seared permanently into my brain. I stood up on shaky legs. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at the woman in the mirror. Her face was blotchy and red, her eyes were swollen. But there was something new there now, something I hadn't seen in a long time, a hard, steely resolve. The ache in my chest was still there, that pain of betrayal, of a 28-year marriage turning to dust before my very eyes. But on top of it, something even stronger was growing inside me. I wasn't going to confront him directly. I wasn't going to scream and cry. I wasn't going to give him any warning at all. That's exactly what he'd expect from me. That would give him the chance to deny everything, to lie, to manipulate me one more time like he always did. No, I was going to be as cold and as calculating as he was. I went back to my office with determined steps. I took the memory card carefully and went upstairs. I slipped into my mother's room as quietly as possible and put the camera back in its hiding place behind the photo of our supposedly happy family. Tonight it would record again, and the night after that, and the one after that too. I wasn't just going to prove what he was doing. I was going to build his cage piece by piece, video by video, night by night. He thought he had all the power, hidden safely in the darkness. He had absolutely no idea that the darkness now had eyes watching him. From that day forward, my entire life became a stage play. I became the lead actress in an elaborate performance about a happy marriage. The script was simple enough: smile, be pleasant, pretend everything is perfectly fine. But behind the curtain, in the backstage of my mind, I was the director of a dark and solitary operation. Each day was a countdown. Each night brought a new collection of evidence against him. Living under the same roof with David became a form of psychological torture. Every affectionate gesture from him felt absolutely repulsive. When he'd hug me coming home from work, I had to fight the overwhelming urge to flinch, to recoil from feeling his skin touching mine. The same hands that gripped my mother's arm so brutally were now touching me. At dinner, I watched him carefully over the rim of my glass, the way he cut his steak, the way he talked casually about his day at the office. It all seemed like a grotesque charade. How could a man harbor so much darkness inside and still laugh at a joke on the television? Who was this person I had slept next to for 28 years? I looked at him now and saw a complete stranger, a monster wearing my husband's familiar face. My main focus became my mother's protection. During the day, I worked twice as hard to create a bubble of safety around her. We read books together, we talked for hours. I made all her favorite foods, but I could still see the fear in her eyes, a constant humming fear that never truly left her. She barely left her room anymore when he was home, and the worst part of all was that I couldn't tell her what I knew. I couldn't say, "Mom, I know everything, I saw it all, I'm going to protect you." Telling her meant risking everything I'd worked for. If she changed her behavior even slightly, if she accidentally confronted him about anything, he'd know immediately that something was wrong. He might find the camera, and I would lose my only weapon against him, so I had to keep up the act even with her. I just hugged her tighter than usual and told her softly, "It's going to be okay, Mom. I promise you, I'm here." And every single morning, the same agonizing routine played out. Wait anxiously for him to leave for work, go upstairs with my heart pounding wildly, retrieve the memory card with trembling fingers, go down to my office, lock the door, and watch the previous night's horror show unfold on my screen. The second night of recording was almost an exact repeat of the first nightmare. The same stealthy entrance in the darkness, the same verbal humiliation and degradation. "You're starting to smell old," he whispered cruelly to her. "This whole house is starting to stink because of you." He didn't physically touch her that particular night, but his words were like slaps across the face. I saved the video to a secure password-protected folder on my computer. I named the folder Project Justice, and I felt the weight of those words. The third night was somehow even worse than before. He came into her room and saw that she'd left a glass of water on her nightstand. He picked it up and threw it violently against the wall. The sound of the glass shattering on the video made me literally jump in my chair. My mother let out a small, terrified cry on the recording. "Learn to clean up after yourself, you useless old woman," he snarled before walking out and slamming the door. In the morning, when I went to wake her, I saw the broken glass scattered on the carpet. "Oh my God, Mom, what happened?" I asked, feigning complete surprise. She just shook her head, trembling all over. I must have knocked it over during the night somehow." I cleaned up the shards carefully, my hands shaking with pure rage, feeling every piece of glass like a stab directly into my own heart. The fourth night, he pinched her hard. On the video, I watched his hand dart out like a striking snake, squeezing the skin on her upper arm viciously. She whimpered in pain, a sound that haunted me. The next morning, the purple mark was there, exactly as it had appeared on the video. I had another piece of proof, another nail in his coffin. But it was on the fifth night that I discovered something that took this abuse to an entirely new level of evil. Something that showed me he wasn't just trying to scare her or humiliate her anymore. He was drugging her. I watched the video with growing horror. He came in like always, but this time he had something in his hand, 2 small white pills. He shook my mother awake roughly. "What? What is that?" she mumbled, groggy and confused. "Your sleeping medicine," he said, his voice falsely calm and reasonable. But Sarah already gave me my medicine before bed," she protested weakly. His false calmness vanished instantly like smoke. "You'll take what I give you," he snapped. "Open your mouth right now." She hesitated, turning her face away from him. He grabbed her roughly by the chin, forcing her head back against the pillow. "I said, open your mouth," he repeated menacingly. With his other hand, he shoved the 2 pills into her mouth forcefully. I saw her body flinch and gag on the screen. He grabbed the water glass from her nightstand and forced it to her lips. "Swallow. All of it," he commanded. After she swallowed, coughing and sputtering, he finally let her go. He stood over her for a long moment. "That'll keep you quiet so you don't cause me any more trouble," he said before leaving and closing the door. I stared at the screen, completely frozen in shock. What were those pills exactly? Were they just extra sleeping pills or something far worse? Suddenly, everything made perfect sense. Her grogginess in the mornings, her confusion that seemed worse than her dementia alone could explain, the fact that she sometimes could barely get out of bed for breakfast. He was sedating her deliberately. He was keeping her drugged up so she'd be more docile, less of a problem during the day, easier to control. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. This was genuinely dangerous. He could be accidentally overdosing her. He could actually kill her. That was the absolute turning point for me. The rage in my chest transformed into icy fear and desperate urgency. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I realized collecting videos wasn't enough by itself. I was dealing with something far beyond my ability to handle on my own. This wasn't a marriage problem anymore. This was a serious crime. A crime happening every single night just a few feet from where I slept, completely unaware. I saved the 5th video carefully. I now had concrete proof of verbal abuse, physical abuse, and the forced administration of unknown medication. I had a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior. I had his face, his voice, his crimes, all recorded in black and white. It was enough, more than enough. I didn't wait another moment. I didn't hesitate at all. I picked up my phone and looked up a number a friend had given me years ago for a completely different situation. A highly rated family law attorney right here in Atlanta. Her name was Michelle Rodriguez. I dialed the number with determination. The receptionist answered in a crisp, professional voice. Rodriguez Law Offices. Good morning. My voice came out steady, without even a hint of tremor. The actress had finally left the stage. Now the director was taking complete control. Good morning, I said firmly. My name is Sarah Bennett. I need to make an urgent appointment with Miss Rodriguez. It's about my mother and my husband. I got an appointment for the very next morning. I lied smoothly to David, told him I was meeting an old colleague from the school for brunch. The lie came with frightening ease now. I was getting disturbingly used to this double life I was leading. I put all the memory cards, each one carefully labeled with the corresponding date, into a small protective case and tucked it deep inside my purse. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. Michelle Rodriguez's office was in downtown Atlanta, in this tall glass building that felt cold and intimidating from the outside. But her office itself was completely different. It was warm and welcoming, with comfortable chairs and a stunning view of the city skyline. Michelle was a woman in her early 40s with intelligent, penetrating eyes and a posture that radiated absolute competence. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a genuinely kind smile. Mrs. Bennett, please have a seat, she said warmly. My assistant mentioned this was urgent. What can I do to help you today? For a moment, the words simply wouldn't come out. Now that I was actually here, about to expose all the dark secrets of my life to a complete stranger, the full weight of it all crashed down on me. But then I started talking. I told her absolutely everything. I started with Thomas's death 8 years ago, my mother moving in with us, David's conditions and demands, my first suspicions, the bruise that looked like a thumbprint, our confrontation in the kitchen, his complete denial. My voice was low, almost a whisper at times. I felt deeply ashamed, as if the failure of my marriage and the abuse happening in my own home were somehow my fault, my responsibility. Michelle listened patiently and attentively without interrupting me once, just making occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finally finished talking, she looked at me with compassion but not pity. Sarah, she said, her tone calm and steady, do you have any proof of this? Anything concrete beyond your suspicions and observations? It was the exact question I'd been waiting for. Yes, I said, my voice suddenly gaining strength and confidence. I opened my purse, took out the protective case, and placed it on the polished mahogany desk between us. I have 5 complete nights of recordings on these cards. Her expression shifted dramatically. The compassion was instantly replaced by intense seriousness. You installed a camera? She asked carefully. Yes, I confirmed. In her room, with night vision capability. He doesn't know anything about it. She retrieved a laptop from her desk drawer and set it carefully on the desk. May I watch them? She asked. I nodded, unable to speak. She inserted the first card, the one with the explicit threat. The video began to play in that silent office. I watched her face carefully as she watched the screen. Her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Her eyes narrowed with concentration when David's hissing voice filled the quiet office, saying, If you do, I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find. I saw a flash of pure indignation and anger in Michelle's eyes. She said absolutely nothing. She just removed the first card and inserted the last one, the one showing the forced medication. She watched the entire horrific scene, the way he grabbed her chin, the way he forced those pills into her mouth, her gagging and struggling. When the video finally ended, she slowly closed the laptop. The silence in that room was absolutely crushing. Sarah, she said finally, and her voice was pure ice. What your husband is doing isn't just a marriage issue or a domestic dispute. This has a legal name. It's called elder abuse. It's a felony. Coercion, battery, possibly unlawful administration of medication without consent. We're talking about multiple serious criminal charges here. Hearing that from a professional, from a lawyer, it validated everything I'd been thinking and feeling. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't paranoid or hysterical. It was real and it was criminal. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, immediately followed by a wave of pure fear. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely a thread. Do I go directly to the police? Not yet, she said firmly, leaning forward, her strategist mode fully engaged. The police will want more than just the videos. They're incredibly powerful evidence. Don't misunderstand me. But his defense attorney will try everything to discredit them. They'll claim you doctored them somehow, that they're taken out of context, that he was just giving her legitimately prescribed medication. We need one more crucial piece, the most important piece, an official medical report, and if at all possible, your mother's direct testimony. My heart sank immediately. But she's so terrified, Michelle. She lies to me constantly to protect him or maybe to protect herself. She won't talk to anyone. She'll talk to the right person in the right environment, Michelle assured me confidently. She needs to feel completely safe and protected, and we need a medical professional to officially document all the injuries and evaluate her mental state. Do you trust her family doctor? Dr. Patterson, I said instantly. Yes, absolutely. He's been Mom's physician for over 15 years now. He's a genuinely good man. Excellent, Michelle said. Here's exactly what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you're going to call Dr. Patterson's office. You'll tell them your mother had a small fall and you want him to examine her as a precaution. You absolutely need to get her in there for an appointment. Once you're alone with him in the exam room, away from anyone else, you're going to tell him everything, exactly what you just told me. And then what? I asked nervously. Then you're going to let Dr. Patterson do his job, she explained. He'll examine her thoroughly, document every single bruise and mark, and he will talk to her professionally. In a medical setting, away from your husband, with you right by her side for support, she might finally feel safe enough to tell the complete truth. And if she does, Dr. Patterson's medical report becomes our cornerstone. Medical evidence that corroborates your video recordings perfectly. The plan was clear and logical, but executing it felt like climbing an impossible mountain. Getting my mother to the doctor, reliving all of this in front of Dr. Patterson. I know it's incredibly hard, Michelle said, as if reading my mind. But this is absolutely the most crucial step. You have to be strong for her now, Sarah. It's the only way to make sure that what you saw on those recordings stops permanently. I left her office an hour later with my head spinning, but with a clear sense of purpose. The Atlanta sun seemed brighter somehow. I had a solid plan. I had a powerful ally. I wasn't alone in the dark anymore, fighting this battle by myself. That night, I barely even looked at David. When he asked about my brunch with my colleague, I just said it was nice to catch up and quickly changed the subject. After he went to bed, I slipped quietly into my mother's room. She was awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. I sat carefully on the edge of her bed and took her hand. Mom, tomorrow morning we're going to see Dr. Patterson, I said gently. Her eyes immediately filled with panic. Why? She asked fearfully. I'm fine, Sarah. I don't need to see any doctor. I know, Mom, I said soothingly, but I want him to look you over just to make absolutely sure everything's okay, your blood pressure, everything. Please, just do it for me. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine intensely, trying to read something I wasn't saying out loud. Finally, she sighed, a sound of tired resignation. All right, dear, if you insist. The next morning, after David left for work, I helped her get dressed carefully. We drove to the clinic in complete silence. Neither of us spoke a single word. I drove with my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, and she stared out the passenger window, lost somewhere in her own world. We arrived at the clinic. The nurse led us to a familiar exam room with that distinctive antiseptic smell. She took Mom's blood pressure, asked all the routine questions, and said cheerfully that Dr. Patterson would be right in. Then the door closed with a soft click, leaving us alone. Me and my mother sitting in the silence of that sterile room, waiting anxiously. My heart was pounding in my throat. In just a few minutes, that door would open again, and I would have to start talking. I would have to detonate the bomb I'd been carrying. The minutes we waited for Dr. Patterson felt like absolute hours. I sat rigidly in the plastic chair next to the exam table where my mother sat, her feet dangling, barely touching the floor. She said nothing at all, just stared down at her own hands, twisting them anxiously in her lap. The paper covering the exam table crinkled with her every tiny movement, the only sound in the room besides the low hum of the computer in the corner. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Patterson came in. He was such a kind man, with graying hair and a smile that always seemed genuine and warm. He'd been our family's physician since Thomas was just a little boy. "Barbara, Sarah, good morning," he said warmly. "So I hear we had a little fall." He turned to my mother with concern. "Where does it hurt, sweetheart?" My mother looked at me immediately, her eyes absolutely pleading. I knew she was about to repeat the same rehearsed story about tripping over something. I had to intervene right now, before she could speak. "Dr. Patterson," I started, my voice shaking just slightly. Actually, it wasn't a fall at all. He stopped looking at his chart and focused completely on me, his brow furrowed with concern. "No?" he asked. "What happened then, Sarah?" I took a deep breath, the air feeling impossibly thick in my lungs. "I need to show you something," I said carefully, "and I need to tell you a story. But please, you have to promise you'll listen to the whole thing without interrupting." The absolute seriousness in my tone clearly caught his attention. He pulled over a small stool, sat down directly in front of us, and folded his hands. "Sarah," he said gently, "you have my complete attention." And so I told him everything, every single detail. I told him about my mother's move into our home, the strange behavior I'd noticed, the fear that seemed to consume her, the unexplained bruises. And finally, the camera. I described in detail what I'd seen on those videos, the humiliation, the threats, the pills forced down her throat. As I spoke, I didn't look at the doctor at all. I looked only at my mother. She was completely motionless, her head bowed low, silent tears streaming steadily down her wrinkled face, dripping onto her trembling hands. She wasn't denying anything I was saying. She was crying because the truth was finally being spoken out loud after so long. When I finished speaking, a profound and heavy silence filled the entire room. Dr. Patterson was visibly pale. He looked from me to my mother and back to me again, processing everything. "My God, Sarah," he whispered, clearly in shock. He stood up slowly, walked to the door, and locked it with a soft but definitive click. That sound echoed like a vault ceiling shut. He came back and knelt down in front of my mother, positioning himself so his eyes were level with hers. His voice became the gentlest I had ever heard it. "Barbara," he said so softly, "I know this is incredibly hard, but I need you to tell me the truth. Is what Sarah just said accurate? Is it true?" My mother lifted her head slowly. Her face was absolutely ravished with grief and fear, but for the first time in months, the constant fear in her eyes had been replaced by something different, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who simply can't fight anymore. She looked at Dr. Patterson, the doctor she'd known and trusted for decades, and she nodded her head. "Yes," she whispered, her voice raw from crying. "It's all true, every word." "He's been doing this to you, Barbara?" he asked gently. "David has?" "Yes," she repeated, her voice a little stronger now. He says I'm a burden on them, that I ruined his life completely. He wakes me up in the middle of the night. He scares me terribly." "And the marks, Barbara?" Dr. Patterson asked, his voice still so gentle. "The bruises on your body. Does he physically hurt you?" She looked down at her own arm as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Hesitantly, slowly, she began to pull back the sleeve of her cardigan. With the doctor's careful help, she exposed her forearm. The thumbprint bruise, now faded to a yellowish color, was still clearly visible. She showed him her wrist, where a new purple blotch was forming. "He squeezes me hard," she said, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "When he gets angry at me, he tells me if I say anything to Sarah, he'll send me away to a terrible place." Dr. Patterson examined each mark carefully and thoroughly. His face became a mask of grim professionalism. "And the pills, Barbara?" he asked. "Does he give you additional medicine at night? Medicine that I haven't prescribed?" "Yes," she confirmed. "He makes me take them. He says it's to keep me quiet so I don't bother anyone." Dr. Patterson stood up. He went directly to his desk and began typing rapidly on his computer, documenting every single word she'd said, every injury he was seeing. He took careful photographs of the marks with a digital camera. Each click of the shutter felt like another nail being hammered into the coffin of my 28-year marriage. While he worked methodically, I went to my mother and wrapped her in my arms. She clung to me desperately, her body trembling with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she whimpered into my shoulder. "I didn't want to cause you any trouble at all." "Shh, Mom," I said, feeling my own hot tears soaking into her hair. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. Nothing. I'm the one who should be sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." After several minutes, Dr. Patterson stopped typing. He printed out several pages and signed them with a flourish. He turned to face me, his expression incredibly grave. "Sarah, what you've described and what Barbara has now confirmed, combined with the physical evidence I'm seeing, is a textbook case of elder abuse. As a physician, Georgia state law classifies me as a mandatory reporter. That means I don't have any choice in this matter. I have a legal duty to report this situation to the proper authorities immediately." My heart leaped in my chest. I knew this was coming. Michelle had prepared me for exactly this, but hearing the actual words spoken out loud made it suddenly real, irreversible, final. "I understand completely," I said, my voice steady and clear. He picked up the phone on his desk. "I'm going to call the Marietta Police Department right now," he explained. "They will likely send officers here to the clinic to take your statements and collect my medical report." He paused, looking at me seriously. "Are you ready for this, Sarah? Are you prepared?" I looked at my mother, who now seemed calmer, more relieved, as if some enormous weight had been lifted from her fragile shoulders. I held her hand tightly. "Yes," I told Dr. Patterson, not looking away from her. "We're ready." He dialed the number. As he spoke to the dispatcher on the other end, explaining the situation in calm, clinical terms, I squeezed my mother's hand. The point of no return had been crossed. There was absolutely no going back now. 20 minutes later, we heard a firm knock on the exam room door. Dr. Patterson opened it carefully. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway, an older man with a lined, weary face and a younger woman with sharp, observant eyes. "Dr. Patterson?" the older officer asked professionally. "I'm Officer Williams. This is Officer Martinez. We understand you have a situation to report." Dr. Patterson invited them in and closed the door behind them. He handed the complete medical report to Officer Williams. "Everything I know is documented in there," he said, "but Mrs. Bennett has additional evidence for you." All eyes turned to me. With hands that were shaking, but with a heart that was absolutely resolute, I opened my purse, took out the small protective case, and retrieved the memory card with a video from the 5th night, the one with the explicit threat and the forced medication. "I recorded this several nights ago," I said, holding the card out to Officer Martinez. "I think you need to see what's on here." She took the small piece of plastic, her gaze curious and professional. She pulled a laptop from a bag she was carrying. The screen flickered to life, its cool blue light illuminating all our faces in that small room. Officer Martinez inserted the memory card into the laptop with practiced efficiency. She made a few clicks, and the grainy black and white image of my mother's room filled the screen completely. The exam room fell into a heavy, tense silence, broken only by the quiet whir of the computer and my mother's nervous breathing beside me. Both officers leaned in close to watch. I watched their faces carefully. At first, their expressions were professionally neutral and unreadable. But as David's silhouette entered the room on the video, I saw their entire posture change. They grew more rigid, more intensely focused. When the audio picked up David's venomous whisper waking my mother, Officer Martinez exchanged a quick, sharp look with her partner. They watched the entire horrific scene without saying a single word. The humiliation, the brutal grab of her chin, the pills being forced down her throat, and then that threat. The camera captured his voice with absolutely chilling clarity. "I will make sure you end up in the worst place I can find. Do you understand me?" When the video finally ended, Officer Martinez didn't move for several seconds. She just stared at the screen where my mother was crying alone in the darkness. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked directly at me. The professional neutrality was completely gone. In its place was a cold, determined anger. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "how long has this been happening to your mother?" "I don't know for certain," I answered honestly, my voice thick with emotion. "I started suspecting something a few weeks ago. I started recording 6 nights ago." Officer Williams, who had been carefully reading Dr. Patterson's report while watching the video, finally spoke. His voice was low and deadly serious. "The medical report corroborates exactly what we've seen here," he said. "Bruising consistent with forceful gripping and restraint, and the victim's direct testimony." He turned to me. "Is your husband at home right now?" "No," I said. "He's at work. He usually gets home around 6 o'clock in the evening." The 2 officers looked at each other again, some kind of silent communication passing between them. All right, Officer Williams said firmly. Here's what we're going to do. Officer Martinez and I will head back to the station immediately to file this report and make sure we have everything we need for an arrest warrant. Given the video evidence we've just seen, I don't anticipate any issues at all getting that warrant. Mrs. Bennett, I need you and your mother to go home and act as normally as possible. When your husband arrives home this evening, do not confront him about anything. Do not say a word about this. We will be at your residence this evening to make the arrest. Go home. Act completely normal. The idea made my stomach clench painfully. How could I possibly look at his face knowing what I knew, knowing what was about to happen? Is he violent toward you? Officer Martinez asked directly. Do you think you or your mother will be in any danger when he gets home today? I don't know, I stammered honestly. He's never been violent with me personally. I never imagined he was capable of... She cut me off gently. Okay, listen carefully. If at any point you feel threatened, if he raises his voice, if anything feels wrong or dangerous, you do not hesitate for even a second. You get your mother, you leave the house immediately, and you call 911. Do you understand me? I nodded, my heart pounding wildly. They gave us a card with their names and a direct contact number. Dr. Patterson assured us he was available for whatever was needed going forward. The appointment was over. The world as I knew it was over. The drive home was absolutely surreal. My mother, for the first time in such a long time, seemed lighter somehow. The act of finally telling the truth, of being believed and supported, seemed to have freed her from at least a portion of her fear. She held my hand the entire way home. I, on the other hand, was a complete bundle of nerves. Every car that passed us seemed suspicious somehow. The waiting was the absolute worst part. The hours crawled by that afternoon with torturous slowness. I tried to read, but the words danced meaninglessly on the page. I tried to watch television, but the sound was just background noise to the storm raging in my head. My mother stayed in her room, napping peacefully. I actually envied her that brief peace. At 5:45, I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. My entire body went completely rigid. He was home. David walked in through the kitchen, actually whistling cheerfully. He tossed his car keys on the counter casually. Hey, honey, he said. Long day at work. He came over and kissed my forehead like always. It took every single ounce of my willpower not to physically recoil from his touch. Hi, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly calm. How was your day? The usual, he said. Meetings, spreadsheets, complete bore. He opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. Where's your mom? She's resting in her room, I replied, turning to the stove and pretending to be busy with dinner preparations. The conversation was so painfully normal. He talked about a colleague, about the traffic on his drive home. I answered in monosyllables, praying desperately that he wouldn't notice my trembling hands or the paleness of my face. Every minute felt like absolute agony. Where are they? I kept thinking. Please just come. Please end this nightmare. We were in the living room, with the evening news on the television when it finally happened. A firm, authoritative knock on the front door. It wasn't a friendly visitor's knock. It was an official knock that meant business. David frowned at me. Are you expecting someone? He asked, confused. No, I lied, my heart lodged in my throat. He got up and walked to the door. I followed him, stopping at the entrance to the living room, my legs barely supporting me. He opened the door, and there they were, Officer Williams and Officer Martinez, standing under our porch light in full uniform. David Bennett? Officer Williams asked formally. David looked completely confused. Yes, he said. Can I help you, officers? We're here to place you under arrest for felony elder abuse, Officer Williams stated clearly. The world seemed to stop completely for one long second. The confusion on David's face turned rapidly to disbelief, then to this incredulous laugh. What? He said. Elder abuse? This is some kind of mistake. There must be a mistake. There's no mistake, sir, Officer Martinez said, her voice cold as ice. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, please. That's when it finally hit him, the reality of what was happening. He looked at the officers, then he looked at me standing frozen in the doorway. Pure rage flashed in his eyes. Sarah, what is this? He demanded. What did you do? I didn't do anything, David, I said, my voice shaking but firm. You did this. All of this. This is absolutely ridiculous, he yelled, taking a step back. It's because of your mother, isn't it? She's been confused, making up stories. I didn't do anything wrong. Officer Williams stepped forward firmly. Sir, we've seen the video recordings. Multiple recordings. Those words hit him like a physical blow. All the air seemed to rush out of him at once. The anger, the denial, it all just drained away completely, replaced by pale, silent shock. "Video?" he stammered, staring at me with wide eyes, betrayal and understanding dawning on his face simultaneously. He didn't fight anymore. He turned around slowly and put his hands behind his back. Officer Martinez took out the handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking shut, locking around his wrists, was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the sound of the end of 28 years of marriage, the end of everything. They read him his rights in that calm, professional way and led him outside. I stood in the open doorway, watching him being put in the back of the squad car. Before they closed the door, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes anymore, just this cold, desolate emptiness. The police car pulled away slowly, its red and blue lights flashing silently down our dark street. The house fell into a profound silence unlike any other. It was the silence of aftermath, of finality. I closed the door and leaned heavily against it, my body finally giving in, shaking completely uncontrollably. I went up the stairs on feet that felt like lead. My mother's door was slightly ajar. She was standing by her bed, hugging herself tightly. She had heard absolutely everything. Our eyes met across the hallway. Neither of us said a single word. I walked to her and wrapped her in my arms as tightly as I could. And there, in the middle of our quiet house, mother and daughter finally cried together. Not from fear anymore, not from sadness, but from this painful, overwhelming sense of relief. The threat was gone, the nightmare was over, but the long, difficult road of justice was only just beginning. The sound of those handcuffs clicking shut marked the end of one chapter, but it was the beginning of another, perhaps an even more exhausting one. The immediate threat inside our house was gone, yes, but it was replaced by the slow, cold machinery of the justice system. David spent that first night in jail. The next afternoon, I was notified that he'd been released on bail. The main condition was a full restraining order. He was forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or my mother, and absolutely forbidden from returning to our home. A friend of his came by to collect some of his clothes and personal items. I packed everything into cardboard boxes and left them on the front porch. I didn't see him. I didn't want to see him ever again. The first thing I did was file for divorce. Michelle handled all the legal paperwork. Signing those documents felt strange and surreal, a stroke of my pen undoing 28 years of shared history. But there was no hesitation in my hand. There was no doubt in my heart. The man I had loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had at all. All that remained was a stranger I needed to legally remove from my life permanently. The house without him was quiet, but it was an entirely different kind of quiet now. It was a peaceful quiet, a safe quiet. I had the locks on all the doors changed immediately. I took his pictures off the walls and out of the frames, packing them away in a box in the very back of a closet. I needed to erase his presence completely, to reclaim this space as ours, as mine and my mother's sanctuary. The months leading up to the trial were a blur of lawyers' meetings, depositions, and this constant low-grade anxiety that never quite went away. I met the prosecutor assigned to David's case, a strong, sharp woman named Jennifer Adams. She had a well-earned reputation for being absolutely relentless in the courtroom, especially in cases involving abuse of vulnerable people. When I first met her, she looked me directly in the eye and said firmly, "Mrs. Bennett, I've watched those videos. We are going to get justice for your mother. I promise you that." Her words gave me a strength I didn't even know I still possessed. Preparing for the trial was the hardest part of everything. Jennifer needed my mother's testimony, but Barbara's dementia was a significant hurdle. There were good days where her memory was crystal clear and she could recount the events in painful, vivid detail, and there were bad days where she was confused, forgot names completely, or simply retreated into a frightened silence that broke my heart. "Don't worry," Jennifer told me during one of our many preparation meetings. "Her testimony is important, yes, but the videos are our smoking gun. They speak entirely for themselves. Her testimony just needs to confirm that the person in those videos is her and the man is your husband. That's all we need from her." In the meantime, our daughter Rachel flew in from Portland. The shock of the news had left her absolutely speechless. "Mom, Dad, I can't believe it," she'd repeated over and over, crying on the phone when I first told her. When she finally arrived, she rushed to hug her grandmother tightly. Seeing Rachel's genuine concern and love for her grandma was like balm to my wounded heart. She stayed with us for 3 weeks, helping care for Barbara, giving me a shoulder to cry on when I needed it, and bringing a little bit of normalcy and even laughter back into our house. Her presence helped my mother tremendously too. Rachel would spend hours with her, showing her pictures of her great-grandchildren on her phone, listening to the same old stories with infinite patience and affection. Slowly, I watched a little bit of the old Barbara return. That sparkle in her eye, a more frequent smile, genuine laughter. The fear that had haunted her for so long began to recede, replaced by the safety of being surrounded by people who truly loved her. But the shadow of the upcoming trial loomed over everything like a dark cloud. 8 long months passed, 8 months of phone calls, of preparation, of sleepless nights. Finally, the day arrived. It was an October morning, the air outside just starting to turn crisp, hinting at the coming fall. I put on my best suit, a navy blue one that made me feel professional and strong. I helped my mother into a pretty floral dress and a soft cardigan. Rachel, who had flown back in specifically for the trial, wore a simple, somber dress. The 3 of us looked like 3 soldiers heading into our final battle together. We drove to the DeKalb County Courthouse. The imposing stone building felt cold and intimidating. We walked inside through the metal detectors, the sound of our heels echoing loudly in the marble hallways. We met Jennifer Adams right at the courtroom door. "Are you ready?" she asked, her gaze steady and confident. I took a deep breath. "As ready as we'll ever be," I said. We entered the courtroom. It was exactly like in the movies and TV shows. The dark polished wood benches, the American flag standing proud, the seal of the state of Georgia mounted on the wall. And on the other side of the room, sitting next to his expensive lawyer, was David. My heart gave a painful jolt. He was noticeably thinner, his face drawn with dark circles under his eyes. He wore a suit that seemed slightly too big for his frame. Our eyes met for one brief instant. I didn't see anger or remorse, just that same cold emptiness. I looked away quickly. We took our seats in the front row directly behind the prosecution's table. The bailiff called out loudly, "All rise." The judge, an older man with a stern, no-nonsense face, entered and took his high-backed chair. "This court is now in session," he announced. The buzz of conversation stopped abruptly. The silence in the room was absolute and heavy. The judge looked down at the papers in front of him. "We are here today for the trial of the state of Georgia versus the defendant, David Bennett." Jennifer Adams stood up, straightening her blazer with confident movements. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed." The judge then turned to the defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit with a smug smile that I immediately disliked. "Is the defense ready?" "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly. The jury selection process began, followed by the opening statements. I listened with growing anger as David's lawyer painted a picture of a stressed man trying to care for a difficult, senile mother-in-law whose accusations were nothing but the confused ramblings of a diseased mind. I felt rage rising in me like a tide. But Jennifer put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's his job to say that," she whispered. "Our job is to show them the real truth." Then it was time. Jennifer stood up, her gaze fixed on the judge. "Your Honor, the state calls its first witness to the stand, Sarah Bennett." My blood ran absolutely cold. The whole room seemed to turn and look directly at me. With my legs trembling but my head held high, I stood up, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I sat down in the chair, feeling too high up, too exposed and vulnerable. Across the room, David stared at me, his face an unreadable mask. Jennifer approached calmly. "Mrs. Bennett," she began, her voice clear and echoing in the silent courtroom, "please tell the jury in your own words why you installed a hidden camera in your mother's bedroom." Sitting there on that witness stand, under the intense gaze of 12 jurors, the judge, and the man who was once my husband, I told our entire story. Jennifer guided me expertly with calm, precise questions, helping me build the narrative clearly for the jury. I spoke of my deep love for my mother, of her progressing dementia, of the difficult decision to bring her into our home. I spoke of the first subtle changes I noticed, the fear that started building in me, the unexplained bruises, and David's cold, complete denial when I confronted him. "And what did you do when your concerns were dismissed, Mrs. Bennett?" Jennifer asked. "I bought a camera," I answered, my voice steady and clear. I had to know the truth. I had to know if I was going crazy or if my mother was genuinely in danger. David's defense attorney objected strenuously, of course. He tried his best to paint me as a paranoid, hysterical wife who had invaded the privacy of everyone in the house without cause. On cross-examination, he was absolutely relentless. "So you, with no concrete proof, just a feeling, Decided to spy on your husband of 28 years? He asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I had the bruises on my mother's body and the fear in her eyes, I replied firmly, looking directly at the jury. For a daughter, that's all the proof you need to take action to protect your mother. My testimony lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time it was over, I was emotionally drained and exhausted. But the hardest part was yet to come. The state now calls Barbara Clark to the stand, Jennifer announced. With Rachel's gentle help, my mother walked slowly to the witness stand. She looked so incredibly small and fragile up there. The defense attorney immediately tried to have her testimony disqualified, citing her dementia diagnosis aggressively. But the judge, after hearing Jennifer's arguments and carefully reading a detailed report from Dr. Patterson about her general lucidity, allowed her to testify. Jennifer was incredibly gentle with her, treating her with such respect. She asked simple yes or no questions. Mrs. Clark, do you recognize the man sitting at that table? She asked, pointing clearly to David. Yes, my mother whispered. That's my son-in-law, David. Mrs. Clark, has this man ever woken you up in the middle of the night? Yes. Has he ever said words to you that made you feel scared or threatened? Yes. Has he ever grabbed you hard, leaving marks on your arms? Tears welled up in her eyes. Yes, she whimpered softly. It was enough, more than enough. The defense attorney tried to confuse her on cross-examination, firing off rapid questions about specific dates and times, but she just shrank back and said quietly, I don't remember those details. Her fragility and honesty were more powerful than any detailed answer could have been. After her came Dr. Patterson, who presented his comprehensive medical report and the photographs of her bruises, explaining to the jury in clear clinical terms exactly why the marks were consistent with forceful gripping and restraint, and not accidental bumps or falls. And then came the moment I had both waited for and dreaded for 8 long months. Your Honor, Jennifer Adams said, the state would now like to present the video evidence marked as Exhibits A through E. A large television screen was rolled out and positioned to face the jury box directly. The bailiff dimmed some of the courtroom lights. The room fell into an incredibly tense hush. Jennifer walked over to the television. We'll begin with the recording from the night of February 26th, marked as Exhibit A, she announced. She pressed play. The grainy black and white image of my mother's room appeared on the large screen. The jurors all leaned forward with rapt attention. I couldn't watch it again. I couldn't bear to. Instead, I watched David intently. He was sitting ramrod straight, his face as white as a ghost, his eyes locked on the screen, forced to relive his own crimes in front of everyone. The courtroom watched in stunned, absolute silence as the monster that had lived in my house was laid completely bare for all to see. David's hissing voice threatening my mother echoed through the courtroom. The sound of him grabbing her chin roughly, her gagging as he forced pills down her throat brutally. I could hear shocked gasps coming from the jury box. I saw one juror, a middle-aged woman, clap her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. By the time Jennifer played the last video, the one with the most explicit threat, the entire atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. The smugness was completely gone from the defense attorney's face. The jury no longer looked at me like a hysterical wife or at my mother like a confused old woman. They looked at David, and in their eyes I saw pure disgust and contempt. Jennifer turned off the television. The lights came back up. She turned to face the jury, her face a mask of absolute gravity. The defense claims words were taken out of context, she said, her voice ringing out powerfully in the quiet room, that these actions were those of a stressed caregiver who made mistakes. But you saw it with your own eyes. There is no context in the world that justifies that cruelty. There is no amount of stress that justifies terrorizing a vulnerable 81-year-old woman in the middle of the night when she's helpless. What you saw, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, was not caregiving. It was torture, pure and simple. And now I ask you to deliver justice for Barbara Clark. The closing arguments were made by both sides. The judge gave his careful instructions to the jury, and then they filed out slowly to deliberate. The wait was the longest of my entire life. Me, my mother, and Rachel sat on the courtroom bench, holding hands tightly, not saying a word. What was there left to say? David and his lawyer sat across the room in their own tense silence. An hour passed slowly, then 2 hours. The afternoon sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the courtroom. Finally, after almost 3 agonizing hours, the bailiff came in. They have a verdict, he announced. My heart stopped completely. We all rose to our feet as the jury filed back in, their faces carefully unreadable. They did not look at David even once. They say that's a bad sign for the defense. They took their seats quietly. The judge turned to the jury foreman, a middle-aged man with glasses. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor, we have, the man said clearly. In the case of the state of Georgia versus David Bennett, on the charge of felony elder abuse, what is the jury's verdict? The foreman unfolded a piece of paper slowly. The rustle of that paper sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. He cleared his throat. He did not look at David. He looked directly at the judge. On the charge of felony elder abuse, we, the jury, find the defendant. He paused for what felt like an absolute lifetime. I held my breath, squeezing my mother's and my daughter's hands with all my might. Guilty. The word hung in the courtroom air for a second before I truly processed it. A sob escaped me, a sound that was half cry, half pure relief. Beside me, Rachel began to weep silently. I turned to my mother. She wasn't crying at all. There was a calm, almost serene expression on her weathered face, as if a violent storm that had been raging inside her for months had finally passed completely. Across the room, David didn't react at all. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his face completely blank, as if the verdict was for someone else entirely. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't move or acknowledge it. The arrogant, controlling man who had terrorized my mother in the darkness looked small and pathetic under the bright courtroom lights. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Jennifer argued forcefully that while David had no prior criminal record, the calculated and repetitive nature of his abuse, the victim's extreme vulnerability, and his complete lack of remorse demanded significant prison time. The judge agreed with her assessment. David Bennett was sentenced to 15 months in a state correctional facility, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation. 15 months. It didn't feel like nearly enough time for the amount of pain and terror he'd caused. But Jennifer assured me that for a man of his professional standing, any prison time at all was a devastating fall from grace. He was taken into custody right there from the courtroom. I didn't watch as they led him away. To me, he was already long gone. While he was serving his time, our divorce was finalized without complications. It was surprisingly straightforward. He didn't contest a single thing. The house in Marietta, the house we had built together, was now mine alone. For the first time in over 28 years, I was the sole owner of my own home. Life after the storm is a strange thing. The immediate danger is gone, but the wreckage is everywhere, all around you. For my mother, the physical wounds healed. The bruises faded away, but the emotional scars ran much, much deeper. She had nightmares frequently. She would wake up in the middle of the night calling my name, terrified and disoriented. We started going to therapy together, which helped tremendously. Talking about what had happened in a safe, professional space helped her process the trauma and understand intellectually that the blame was never, ever hers. For nearly a year, things got steadily better. Rachel's constant support, the peace and safety in our home. It did absolute wonders for Barbara. But dementia is a relentless thief. It doesn't stop for anything. The improvement in Mom's emotional state didn't stop the disease's relentless march on her mind. Her short-term memory began to fail more dramatically and rapidly. She started getting lost inside her own home, not recognizing familiar objects or rooms. It got to a point where she needed 24-hour professional care, something I, with a completely broken heart, had to admit I could no longer provide on my own adequately. The decision to move her into an assisted living facility was one of the hardest decisions of my entire life. But with Rachel's help and support, we found an excellent place. A place with beautiful gardens and kind patient nurses and constant activities designed for dementia patients. The day she moved, we both cried together. But when I saw her settled comfortably in her new armchair, looking peacefully out the window at a bed of beautiful roses, I knew deep down it was the right decision. I visited her every single day without fail, rain, or shine. Today, 6 years have passed since that trial. I'm 65 years old now. I live alone in the house that was once full of laughter, then pain, and now holds a quiet, solitary peace. David was released from the correctional facility over 4 years ago. I don't know where he is now, and I don't want to know. I heard through the grapevine from an old mutual acquaintance that he moved somewhere up north and lives a reclusive life. He lost his job, his friends, his entire family. He lost everything he tried to protect with his cruelty and violence. My mother, Barbara, passed away peacefully 3 years ago in her sleep. The dementia had taken her far away from us long before then, but I was right by her side until her very last breath, holding her hand. She spent her final years in complete safety, surrounded by professional care, and knowing, even in her moments of deep confusion, that she was loved. And that, to me, was the real justice in all of this. Sometimes at night, I sit on the back porch, the same one David and I built together all those years ago, and I wonder about everything. I replay our 28 years of marriage in my head like a film. Were the signs always there that I missed? That impatience, that need for control, that subtle coldness lurking beneath the surface? Did I just choose not to see them clearly? Or did Thomas's death break something in him so profoundly that a monster living dormant inside finally woke up? I don't think I'll ever have a definitive answer to those questions. Maybe there isn't one. What I've learned from all of this is that evil, more often than not, doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork like in fairy tales. It comes with a familiar smile, with a logical excuse, with the face of someone you love and trust completely. I've learned that you must always, always listen to that little voice inside you that says something is wrong, something isn't right. And I've learned the hardest way possible that the safety of a vulnerable person, whether it's a child or an elderly parent, is worth infinitely more than keeping the peace, avoiding a confrontation, or saving the appearance of a perfect marriage. You have to be their voice when they can't speak, their eyes when they can't see, their strength when they have none. You have to act decisively, even if it means tearing your own world down completely to save theirs. I've learned that real strength isn't in enduring pain quietly and stoically. Real strength is in having the courage to turn on a light in the darkest of places, no matter how terrifying that might be. And sometimes, the family you fight to protect is the only thing that truly matters in this world.